I'm Hans Kahlert for Precision Aerobatics, and this is PA Builds. The airplane is mostly built by this point, so we'll begin the final steps of assembly by putting the plane on its gear. Start by inspecting the wheel hubs for any excess plastic, and trim it flush if needed. Find the two halves of the supplied landing gear and identify which side is which using the threaded holes in the fuselage gear block for reference. Here I have shown an exploded assembly. It will typically go bolt, washer, landing gear, self-locking nut, washers, the wheel, and another self-locking nut. The first nut should be tight to lock the axle bolt to the gear. The outer nut should only be tight enough to prevent the wheel from wobbling while still allowing it to rotate freely. Whether you're using the painted wheel pants or the optional carbon fiber ones from a bling package, you'll first need to differentiate the sides and test fit the landing gear strut into the corresponding notch that's molded in the pant. They should fit perfectly together. If not, then you need to make a very minor adjustment to the strut. This is done by easing over the sharp carbon fiber edge with a file. With it all fitting nicely, you can now determine how high to mount your wheel pants. Smooth paved surfaces can run the pants fully down, while the grass or rougher surface may benefit from being slightly higher up. This is your call, and when you're ready, use a 1.5mm drill bit to transfer the location of the screw hole to the pant from the back side of the strut. Now remove the pant, and while supporting it with your fingers, drill it through. The two retention screws are very small and will shear if stressed. Gently thread these in using a tapping motion. Remove the screw from the newly tapped wheel pin and attach it to the strut. Have a look to check that the screw point has not come too near to the foam wheel. Nip just the point off if necessary. Now we can mount the gear to the fuselage with bolts and washers and a dab of blue Loctite. Your kit either came with a rectangle of covering for the gear block, or it can be sourced from a piece of fuselage opening scrap. Iron it in place now if you'd like. Next, we move on to installing the motor and ESC. The motor will either drop into the box from the top or be slid in through a hole on the side of the box. The important issues at this step are to ensure that the face of the motor fits perfectly flat against the motor mount, that the bolts and washers also sit flat, spreading the load evenly against their side of the mount, and that you do not over-tighten the bolts, thereby crushing the motor mount. Use blue Loctite and snug the bolts evenly until the motor sits firmly against the mount. Then add a quarter of a turn clockwise to each bolt and you're done. The ESC should be mounted far forward on the motor box and in an area of good cooling. Depending upon your model, it can be secured with a zip tie or two along the sides or undersides of the motor box. Connect the 3 motor wires to the ESC, and if possible, test the direction of rotation now. The motor should spin clockwise as viewed from the pilot seat. If it does not, swap the positions of any 2 wires or reprogram the direction of the ESC by the manual. For safety's sake, be sure to do all of this without the propeller mounted. Route your battery and receiver wire cables through the bulkhead and into their locations. Also, verify that the motor wires are not able to come in contact with any portion of the rotating motor. Locate the clear scoops and use a pair of curved scissors to neatly create the opening and size the base to fit on the motor box. You can glue these on with whatever you like: epoxy, CA, canopy glue. I personally use 5-minute epoxy and wait for it to thicken up a bit. I then either tape them or pin them in place while they dry. The motors will fit through these scoops if you ever need to get at them. Next, we can move on to the cowling. Please note that the manual for some models may require sanding down the motor box corners for a little additional clearance. With the canopy hatch installed, begin by test fitting the cowling to ensure between 3 to 4 millimeters of cowl overlapping the canopy. You may have to create small notches in the bottom of the cowl to allow deeper clearance over the landing gear. The best way I've found to do this is to set it in position and score the paint with a sharp hobby blade. Then remove it and either continue cutting through with a blade, or better yet, cut along the edges of them with a sharp pair of cutters. Deeply scoring the surface will prevent the paint from popping as you make these end cuts with the pliers. I then nibble away at the area and clean it all up with a needle file. No other trimming of your cowling will be necessary. Once we know we have the required overlap, we will lay out 4 long pieces of masking tape. Apply one on each of the mounting tabs. Mark the center of each mounting tab on the tape, then peel it back a ways and slide the cowling back on. For the proper alignment, you'll need the motor, collet, and backplate in place. For models like the Addictions, you must center the motor shaft horizontally and vertically in the cowl's large opening. It's a bit easier on the other PA models, as you can line up the cowling by hand using the cowl's curved lip to match up the backplate. Try to balance the 3 to 4 millimeter minimum overlap with a gap between the cowl and backplate that looks appropriately scale. With the cowl exactly where you want it, lay the tape back down taut, securing the cowling and verifying the alignment is still good. Then, with a 1.5 millimeter drill through the cowling, but only drill deep enough to mark through to the tabs. Don't drill them through yet. Then remove the cowl. The back side of the mounting tabs have a carbon fiber reinforcement that you must carefully drill through. Pressing too hard will break the tab, so take your time. Finally, locate the cowling screws and tap the 4 new holes. Stiffen the threads with CA and then mount your finished cowl. When you're ready, slide the collet fully onto the motor shaft, then the prop onto the collet shaft, and top it off with a washer and nut. Test the alignment of the back plate, prop, and spinner, making absolutely sure that the prop is not contacting the spinner. Otherwise, the spinner could be destroyed in flight. If additional clearance is needed, equally file both of the blade windows until the correct fit is achieved. If your model was supplied with landing gear cuffs, install them now using a piece of double-sided tape. Vortex generators are available for purchase separately from the kits, but they're included in the bling packages. Their installation is encouraged as they further enhance the model's slow speed characteristics. Begin by laying out all of the pieces and sanding or scuffing all of the small tabs that will become glued into the wing structure. You will have to consult the pictures in your model's specific manuals for the exact location and spacing of these. When you know where they will go, a hot paper clip or knife makes quick work of the many small covering incisions. Since the undersides of PA's wings are transparent, the corresponding laser cut slots are mostly visible. For incisions that must be made through the opaque covering, a long needle can usually be passed through the bottom slot and visually guided through to the top side, marking out where the incisions should be. For occasions where this isn't possible, you can use the tabs of the VGs to approximate the locations, or feel for the corresponding slots. Take your time here to avoid any unnecessary holes. Now do a dry fit of all the Vortex generators. The slots shouldn't need any further adjustment unless the VGs aren't standing perpendicular to, or won't fully seat on, the wing's surface. Then remove them again. CA will fog up the covering, so mix up some 30-minute epoxy and apply it to both the wood slot's interior and the carbon fiber tabs. After you've seated and aligned each one, if you can leave a very small strengthening fillet of epoxy around the base of the VGs, then that's all the better. Before you set them aside to dry, make absolutely sure that every VG is perpendicular to the wing surface. Use tape to hold any stubborn ones in place as the epoxy cures.